The Ryzen 5600X and 5800X are finally in stock. Of course, Intel just lowered prices on the i5-10600K and i7-10700K. And we've got the Ryzen 3600 and 3700X. So what's the best CPU for gaming? We're going to go through performance and cost and figure it all out. Coming right up. Hi, welcome back to PC Builder. I'm Jason. I'm so excited for this video because we get to talk about something we haven't talked about in a long time, which is consumer choice. We have been besieged by everything being out of stock, from the Ryzen 5000 CPUs to the NVIDIA RTX 3000 lineup to the AMD 6000 lineup, that we just have completely forgotten what it's like to have a choice. Well, the good news is that the Ryzen 5 5600X and the Ryzen 7 5800X are back in stock as of the filming of this video at both Newegg and at Amazon for the MSRP price. Now, they may sell out occasionally, but I expect that this is going to be the beginning of regular stock availability, at least for those two CPUs. Hopefully, we'll see the same for the 5900X and the 5950X at some point. But that brings to light a real brand new discussion for us, which is what is the best CPU for gaming right now in early 2021 when we actually have things at MSRP available. This is particularly heightened because Intel has reduced prices on the i5 and i7 lineup for the 10th gen, so that i5-10600K is now $220 and the i7-10700K is now $320. Of course, that's what this channel is all about. It's about getting you the best price to performance in your builds. If that's the kind of content you want to support and you want more of, then remember to give the video a like, subscribe, and click the bell icon. It's a fantastic way for you to get the content you need for PC building awesomeness and to support the channel. With that, let's jump into it. So why does the CPU even matter? Isn't it all about the graphics card? After all, that's what's rendering the frames, right? Well, not necessarily. When you're playing a game, you're either GPU bound or you're CPU bound. Where you're GPU bound when the graphics card just can't keep up. This happens when you're playing at higher resolutions or you got a weaker graphics card. And you're CPU bound when the graphics card's rendering so many frames per second that the CPU becomes the bottleneck. This most often happens at 1080p gaming with high-end graphics cards. Now, of course, you can also run into an issue if the game is so CPU intensive with other processes that it slows the entire system down. You see this with like big turn-based games that have a lot of AI in them. Now, all the CPUs we're looking at today are either 6-core 12-thread processors or they're 8-core 16-thread processors. So you can run just about any title with them. So when is this going to matter? Well, our baseline competitor, the Ryzen 5 3600, is sufficient to get the max FPS at 1080p in high settings out of any GPU that is weaker than a RX 5600 XT or an RTX 2060. Now, once you get to the RX 5600 XT or RTX 2060 and above, at those levels, the Ryzen 3600 begins to get CPU bottlenecked and gets fewer FPS than a faster, more capable CPU. In order to figure out the best gaming CPU, let's take a look first at the cost of each system, because they're all going to be different. They're all going to have different motherboards, different cooling solutions, different power requirements. So the things that we're going to hold constant in this are, it's all going to have the same memory, all going to have the same storage, all going to have the same video card. In this case, we're going to go with the RX 6800 as a stand-in, and the same case, of course. For the Ryzen 3000 systems, we're going to go with the included box coolers for each one of them, the 3600 and the 3700X, because they're frankly just fine for these systems. For the motherboard on both of the systems, we're going to go with the ASRock B550M Pro 4, one of the best micro ATX B550s in my estimation for Ryzen 3000, and only $105. Great audio on it, by the way. For the power requirements on these, we are going to go with the same power supply on each one because they only require just about 600 watts. The 3700X system is just pushing the line there where I would almost think about going up, but I still think 600 watts works for both of them. And we're going to pull a unit off of the Linus Tech Tips PSU Cultist list in either Tier A or Tier B for each of these systems. We're not going to go with a crappy Tier C power supply. In this case, we're going to go with the Be Quiet Pure Power 11 600 watt 80 plus gold unit. If you didn't watch my video on how to buy the best power supply, I'll put that up in the card. Now for the 3600, we come up with a total cost of $1,210. And for the Ryzen 7 3700X, we come out with a total cost of $1,330 for these systems. Now let's take a look at the Intel systems, starting off with the Intel i5 10600K. These systems we're actually going to lay out identically, the i5 and the i7. Both of them need significant cooling, and they do not come with a sufficient included box cooler. You can just throw that one into the recycle bin. So we're going to go with the Scythe Fuma 2 on each one of them. This is a $60, so it's actually still kind of in the budget range for a high-end cooler, and it's very, very capable. For the motherboards, Z490 motherboards can be a little bit of a pain because some of the really budget motherboards, their VRMs are not sufficient to heavily overclock them, and we want to be able to do that with this. So in this case, I've gone with the cheapest Z490 motherboard that I feel comfortable can run both of these overclocked, which is the MSI Z490A Pro for $170. And because these CPUs have much higher power requirements, we need to go with a 700 watt power supply. In this case, we've gone with the Antec Neo Eco Gold Zen 700 watt 80 plus gold, again, from the Linus Tech Tips PSU Cultist list in the A or the B tier. The cost for the i5 system at the 10600K is $1,377, and for the i7 10700K, the cost is $1,466. And finally, we are going to include the i9 10900K, same setup as the i7, cooling and everything, except it costs $1,590. Rounding this out is the Ryzen 5000 systems. So we have to remember for Ryzen 5000, not all the motherboards are coming with a Ryzen 5000 ready BIOS. So the first thing we're going to swap out here is we are going to, for both systems, swap out the ASRock board for the Gigabyte B550M Aorus Pro-P. This is a board where I feel very confident in the VRMs. It's got very high quality audio, and it has BIOS flashback, so it can handle either CPU. We're also going to swap out the included cooler on the Ryzen 5 5600X because it's shown to increase our performance. And we're going to go with the Be Quiet Pure Rock Slim CPU cooler, $25 over at Amazon. Really, any of the kind of mid-tower 3 or 4 heat pipe coolers will do just fine here. Just pick whatever's the cheapest. And the power supply, we're going to go ahead and stick it out with the Pure Power 11 on the 5600X build. Well, on the 5800X build, we actually need significantly more cooling, so we're going to go with the Scythe Fuma 2 on it, again, similar to the Intel systems, and it also is just above the line where I feel comfortable, so we are going to go ahead and bump it up to the 700 watt power supply as well. The total cost for the Ryzen 5 5600X system is $1,359, and for the Ryzen 7 5800X system, it's $1,557. Let's take a look at the 11 game benchmark that Hardware Unboxed did during the Ryzen 5000 launch, comparing the gaming performance of all of these CPUs at 1080p with an RTX 3090 graphics card. I'm going to include a link down in the description to both of their launch videos, and I recommend you watch them and of course subscribe to their channel as they're amazing. Looking at the results, the Ryzen 5 3600 averages 165 FPS across all 11 games at 1080p with a 130 FPS average for the 1% lows. Now, using the 3600 as our baseline, the Ryzen 7 3700X came in 4% faster at 172 FPS. The Intel systems did quite a bit better, with the i5 coming in at 10% faster than the Ryzen 3600 at 184 FPS, and the i7 10700K coming in at 18% faster with 200 FPS. Now, the Ryzen 5000 systems both performed exceptionally well, with the Ryzen 5 5600X at 20% faster than the 3600 at 205 FPS, and the Ryzen 7 5800X at 22% faster with 211 FPS. Ahead by just a hair is the i9 10900K at 23% faster than the 3600 at 213 FPS. So now, putting it all together, let's take a look at the cost of the systems and the performance and figure out what's the best gaming CPU. We've added up the cost of the CPU, the cooler if it needed one, the motherboard, as well as the power supply. Those are the things on each system that were a little bit different. We've divided that by the total performance, and Here's what we found. Looking at the cost per frame numbers, we can see that the Ryzen 5 3600 came in at $2.30 cost per frame. Now remember, we're dividing that all up with the cost of the motherboard, the cost of the cooler, the power supply, etc. Trailing not too far behind though is the Ryzen 5 5600X, which is one of the top performing CPUs in the performance benchmarks, and right now at $2.61, one of the best performance in terms of cost per frame as well. Trailing just a little bit further behind, but of course not as good of a performer, was the Ryzen 7 3700X at $2.91 per frame. The Intel systems do pretty well here. However, they do trail the Ryzen 5600X. The 10600K came in at $2.95 per frame. The 10700K came in at $3.21 a frame. The biggest quote-unquote losers in terms of cost per frame in this analysis are the Ryzen 5800X and the 10900K, which is not surprising because they are the most expensive systems and they come in at $3.47 per frame and $3.58 per frame. So who wins? Well, let's start off by saying if you have any of these CPUs, congratulations, you've got one of the best gaming CPUs on the planet. Much better than, say, a third generation Intel i5, right? But of course, we like to split hairs as techies and we like to do this for science, so let's do it for science. At 1080p, super high frame rate with something like an RTX 3090, there is a technical winner in the i9 10900K. However, big asterisk next to that, if you look at the price to performance of that, of something like the Ryzen 5 5600X, it gets almost as much frame rate as the i9, except it costs a lot less. So I think from a price to performance standpoint, at the high end, there's really no beating the Ryzen 5 5600X. Now you might have another reason to get the i9 10100K. It's got more cores, more threads, you can have more productivity. But if you're just gaming, I really got to give it to the Ryzen 5 5600X. Tell me down in the comments, did you think that's a fair analysis? Do you think it's flawed? What would you have picked instead? What would you have looked at? And of course, we didn't do best budget CPU. So if that's something that you're interested in, let me know down in the comments. We'll do another one of these. We'll throw in like the 10400F, the i5. We'll throw in maybe some of the 4-core processors as well and take a look at them. Tell me down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. Of course, if you got value out of this video, if you just liked watching it, remember to give it a like, subscribe, and click the bell icon because that's the kind of stuff we do around here. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.